Donald Trump just got incredible news from the Polymarket betting website, and Kamala Harris is now seeding doubt that the presidential election will be free and fair. To help me go through all this, I have Emerald Robinson. Emerald, thank you for joining me again.
It's always good to see you, Stephen. Thank you.
So just some background for people that are new to my channel. Emerald is a former White House correspondent for NewsMax and OANN, as well as an incredible independent journalist breaking some of the biggest stories that were helpful to me in understanding the election and politics. Just last night and this morning, Kamala Harris started raising doubt about whether this election will be free and fair, saying the only way it won't be stolen is if Americans stand up for that. What the heck is she talking about? I thought our elections couldn't be stolen. Now she's seeding doubt that if she loses, the election was stolen.
Well, you know what's also interesting about that, and I until you raised that for me, I hadn't really thought about it, but remember Kamala Harris was actually, when she was a senator, she was one of those senators in the committee questioning cybersecurity experts like J. Alex Halderman about voting machines and saying that they could be used to steal an election. And here we've come kind of full circle, right? There's these amazing clips of Kamala Harris from 2017 saying, our voting systems are vulnerable. The elections can be rigged. These machines are not secure. There's some interesting dynamics at play here. And I honestly, Stephen, I don't know for sure which way it will go. I will tell you why I'm a bit pessimistic, and Kamala Harris's recent statements like that make me more pessimistic, I guess. But I think that here's what I think. I think optically it's getting very difficult for Democrats to pull off a steal. Now, they could easily steal the election. All the processes are still in place, maybe even worse in some states than it was in 2020. So they could definitely, and I was having this conversation with an expert last night about it, and they said, the way they put it to me is the deviations will be so obvious this time around to the American public, because though I feel like Donald Trump had overwhelming support in 2020, it's even more overwhelming now because people have lived through 4 years of a Biden-Harris administration in which, it's like the Carter years, right? People can't afford groceries. And this is not just Republicans, okay? This is not just conservatives. I live in a mostly blue area, Stephen, and I hear complaints from people all the time about how they can't buy groceries, how life is harder. So actually, a steal is optically more difficult to pull off because people understand I didn't go vote for Kamala Harris. And it's just going to be harder. It's going to be a harder sell. So I think they're grappling with how do they create a narrative that it was stolen the other way around. Also, you got to keep in mind, they've already declared that January 6th, which will be the Electoral College certification, date, is a national emergency. They've designated the U.S. Secret Service as the entity that will oversee it. I don't think Election Day is the end of it. And Kamala Harris saying that tells you that that's the case. You've also had CISA, Cybersecurity Infrastructure and Security Agency, under this, a sub-agency over the Department of Homeland Security, who supposedly make sure there's no foreign interference in our election, saying that you might not know election results on the day of the election in real time because of a DDoS cyber attack. And they didn't say you might not. Actually, they made it more as you won't. This is most likely to happen, which a cybersecurity expert who is also a county GOP chair pointed out to me. They're sending you all kinds of signals that there's going to be a lot of shenanigans on November 5th and the days afterward. So we're not going to know that day. And Kamala Harris saying this, though, means that they're hedging even more. You know what surprised me, though, Stephen, is that they went ahead with Kamala Harris because she's such a weak candidate and they knew it. And it was always optically difficult to say that people in America overwhelmingly went out and voted for her. So I'm surprised that she's even still the candidate. I thought they might pull another bait and switch, but you know, I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen, but it's definitely difficult to pull off a steal for Kamala Harris. So now they're flipping the script already and saying, if Donald Trump wins, it was stolen.
Yeah. That was my thinking was now that it looks like momentum is moving in Trump's direction, that she's going to lose the swing states, especially Pennsylvania, that they may be setting this thing up so that when she loses, they can then say, oh, we need to file all these lawsuits. We can't trust the elections to be free and fair. They're going to do the exact thing that they demonized 4 years ago.
Well, and basically what they did do, but weren't as prepared to do in 2016, right? When we get down to the state level, and I've been talking to a lot of different people in the states, there might be a possibility that they allow Donald Trump, and I say allow because they are still, the powers that be are still very much in charge of our election systems. The question is, will Americans believe it and go along with it? Pennsylvania is one they might let him pick up, and there's some interesting dynamics there, Stephen, that you probably haven't thought about. Remember, Josh Shapiro, the current governor, the former attorney general, was a vice presidential pick, hopeful for Kamala Harris. Well, they passed over him. Some said it was because he was too Jewish for the Democrat Party, and they would have a Palestinian problem on their hands. He was also problematic for some of the skeletons in his closet, and particularly one unsolved murder case in the state of Pennsylvania in which he kind of presided over as a district attorney that was coming back from the grave to haunt him. So he is a bit sour on that. Josh Shapiro was very instrumental in the steal in 2020, as he was in some shenanigans that went on in 2022. I have heard that he's not willing to play along this time because he understands that if there is an 8-year reign of Kamala Harris, that's detrimental to his own presidential aspirations or political aspirations. So he's not as willing to play ball as the governor of the state. So I think that's why you're seeing some of the better odds for Donald Trump there. In Georgia, I understand the early voting numbers have looked very good for Republicans. Here's my concern about Georgia, Stephen, is that we just had a ruling recently from Judge McBurney in regards to the rules that were enacted, that were voted on by the State Election Board of Georgia, that would have forced county clerks and precincts to reconcile the vote by the day. What does that mean? That just means that they have to make sure that the number of voters and the votes add up and that everything seems kosher, which you think is their job. But according to Judge McBurney, it's not. And in fact, that they must certify the election, even if they think there's problems. Even if they don't really want to sign their name on the dotted line and attest to this being totally fine, they are forced to certify. Now, why would Judge McBurney need to do that, right? Why not just allow the clerks to do their job and say, hey, something doesn't look right here. Let's investigate it before we certify, which is what they should technically be allowed to do, even by law. And the state election board just tried to reiterate that with these rules that were put forward. But Judge McBurney just shot that down. Mark Elias, which is the Democrat super lawyer, former Perkins Coie, that would be familiar to the audience that's very familiar with Russiagate. Perkins Coie was a law firm that was very involved with the so-called Steele dossier. He has been working heavily in Georgia, filing litigation to try to stop rules like that from going forward. He celebrated the decision. I think Georgia's still a toss-up because of decisions like that from McBurney and other rules that have not been allowed to take place. I think instead of Pennsylvania, North Carolina is a bit problematic. Not only did you have Hurricane Helene, but Democrats had already, which was hit a very heavily red area. I know, I used to live in Western North Carolina. I know well. Asheville's the outlier. That's the region maybe that most people, or the city that most people focus on when they look at the news. But the outlying areas, you go 10 minutes out of Asheville and it's quite red. they've been hit really hard. Voting's going to be a little bit difficult. I know that they're trying to get some infrastructure there to make sure that these people can vote, but you're probably going to end up with a lot of disenfranchised voters from the after effects of Hurricane Helene. But even prior to that, Democrats were creating a narrative about North Carolina that I saw with Georgia in 2020, which makes me think that they are looking at North Carolina as a Kamala Harris state, right? Mm-hmm. Which we would not think would technically be in play. But if you watch MSNBC, if you watch CNN, they say, oh, she's gaining ground there. Even I think MSNBC had her like +1. Some of the polls, the left-leaning polls had her +1 in North Carolina. And if you know the lay of the land, that's not true. That's not really the case. But now with Hurricane Helene and some of the officials that are in place that regarding the elections, like the state election board there is quite left-leaning. One of my friends who works in the state and had ran for North Carolina GOP, he says they're actually communists. He says the director of the state election board there is a avowed communist. And I mean, he would know, he's worked in the state long enough. So I think North Carolina is problematic. I think Arizona is still very problematic for Donald Trump. So I think we're going to have a lot of contested states following the election. This might surpass chaotically 2020, which sounds crazy, right?
Yeah, no, I agree. It could be. Today's economic environment is still really stressful for a lot of us, but with the Fed finally dropping rates, there is no better time than now to put you and your family in a better financial position. If you're a homeowner, American Financing is helping thousands of families just like you who have been putting everyday expenses on credit cards get out from underneath the debt by tapping into their home's equity. American Financing is saving their borrowers over $800 a month on average. $800 a month is like $10,000. Now, it costs absolutely nothing to find out how much you can save. They are closing some in as little as 10 days. And if you start today, you may not have to make the next 2 mortgage payments. There is no better time than now to turn your situation around. I want you to reach out to my friends at American Financing. Call 888-686-8030. That's 888-686-8030. Or visit americanfinancing.net/Gardner. All right, let's get back to this interview. What do you, let me put this up on the screen here. And let's look at this together. So this is the betting site, Polymarkets. Over the last 10 days, Trump has gone from up 5 to up 9 to up 15 to now up 20. They say, it doesn't matter who votes, it matters who counts the votes. But from the American people willing to put up money, momentum is swinging in Donald Trump's favor. What do you make of these betting websites compared to polls? And why do you think momentum seems to suddenly be breaking in Trump's favor?
Well, there's a number of reasons as to why it's breaking in Trump's favor, because there is no good news that comes out of the Biden, really Harris now administration at all on any given day. Like I said, people are not faring well. People have seen what has happened in Western North Carolina, North Georgia, East Tennessee, you name it. By the day, the conflicts, the increased conflict, in the Middle East, there's just no good news on any given day. The continued persecution of Donald Trump has only aided him in his publicity, right? It's been a pretty good publicity push for him. It continues to be the assassination attempts, though I don't think the campaign has really messaged so well off of those. I think that they could have done more. It still benefited Donald Trump. And Kamala Harris is just a terrible candidate. She is terrible. She had a great debate. She's a terrible politician. She can't go on TV unscripted and make 2 sentences make sense. And even in their friendly media like MSNBC, it's hard to portray her in a positive light. She's just she's even worse than Joe Biden, which I did not think was possible. And it's kind of surprising because she was Obama's pick in 2020. But she didn't garner but 6% of the support in their primary. And so they had to sell her. They had to tack her on to Joe Biden. I think the Obama team was really surprised at how bad she was at being vice president and how they couldn't even like spoon feed her the messaging and her go out there and deliver it. So she's just the worst possible optics that they could put out there. So I think the betting, and usually betting sites, right? The betting odds are actually better indicators than the polls. The polls are totally rigged. And it is interesting that the polls are also largely favoring Donald Trump. And you wonder, well, I know how they do their polls. And it doesn't matter how unfavorable it is for the Democrat candidate. They can weight them in such a way typically, or they create a narrative from the polls. They selectively select data to push that favors the Democrat candidate. So we're in a very interesting time in which they're not able to do that. I had one friend who worked under the Trump Department of Justice as an assistant attorney general, and she told me she's actually concerned that they flipped tactics and now are trying to make would-be Republican voters complacent by making more positive polls for Donald Trump. Perhaps it is too big to rig. That's what a lot of the Trump supporters say, and that's what a lot of the Trump team tells me. I just know that the machine is still in place to be able to rig it if they can. And I'm not sure how much they even care about optics at this point. If they're putting the U.S. Secret Service in charge of January 6th and they expect, what do they call? Oh, they're expecting a mass casualty event in Congress is what they're saying. I'm not sure optics matter. And that's what it comes down to, I think, Stephen, on November 5th and the days after is, do they believe that they can pull it off and get the American people to go along with it, even though it looks bad? Or do they feel that even for them and their ability to rig it, it is too much optically to pull off and that the American people will not go along with it? I think that's what we're really facing, because it does matter who counts, and the same people are still counting. Now, I did have, I'll stop after this, a former Pentagon official who's still very tied into the national security state said to me the other day, he said, it might not feel like your election integrity activists are gaining a lot of ground on the election security front, but he said you are, in that you're shining a light on it. And it does make it harder for them to pull off, even if things have not changed, processes that have not changed. With more people actually looking at it, it makes it harder for them to steal it. But again, we'll see.
Yeah. It is interesting. The polling has been all over the place. Yeah. Every year they say, "Oh wow, I guess the pollsters were wrong again." And every so
year.
where people are actually putting up money. And this hasn't been Trump dominating. It's just really been in the last 10 days that he's seen this surge. I just can't help but think that some of that has to do with two things. Number one, I feel like Trump is better at articulating how he's going to make America more affordable, how he's going to make America great, how he's going to make America safe, how he's going to make America affordable. And on the other side, they've been, trotting her out of the basement more. And as people hear her more and more, they're cringing more and more. They're being turned off by her more and more. She's rejecting interviews left and right. I mean, for heaven's sakes, Time Magazine had a cover where literally their cover was, "We invited Kamala Harris to do an interview and she rejected us. Meanwhile, Donald Trump did a 90-minute sit down." So I feel like maybe those two things. He's better at articulating how he's going to make your life better. And she is out in the public and people are going, "We don't want any part of this."
Well, it's not just the articulation of the policy. It's that people remember 4 years under Donald Trump. So he can just reference back the 4 years of his presidency and where most people were. I mean, clearly once we got into 2020, it was a whole different scenario, but leading up to the pandemic, which, we could get into that. And what I think about the pandemic, it was convenient timing to take down a otherwise extremely good economy. Trump was headed into 2020 with very strong, not just GDP, because the economists, the corporatists, the stock markets gets focused on GDP. But what you also had that is often overlooked is you had real wage growth. And when you're talking about real wage growth, that means an average American who's working in a regular job actually feels like they have more purchasing power based on the income they earn, right? Because they're actually earning more income and they have more disposable income to spend oftentimes than just when they're getting paid a little bit more, but also the prices have went up, right? Which is we're seeing now the prices have just went up exponentially under the Biden-Harris administration. So people understand what they're experiencing now. And when Kamala Harris is asked about what she's going to do to fix that, she says, oh, well, we need to turn over a new leaf. Well, she is actively a part of the administration in which people feel like they have less money, that they can't go to the store and buy as much goods, or, they can't go on that vacation because they don't have the disposable income. A lot of people now can't, housing prices are still astronomically high. They didn't go down or adjust the actual price of the home with the high interest rate we had, right? So people understand they can't go and buy a home. And when she's asked about it, she says, well, I was raised in a middle-class household. And then she goes on about being middle class, and she has no examples of how she's going to change that, how she's going to fix it. And so, people understand they're just not better off. And they actually have two real world examples. It's not hypotheticals. There's two real world examples to compare apples to apples.
Yeah. No, it's a really unique feature this go around where they each have a track record to go off of, and one made your life more expensive. I realized real wage growth is kind of a tongue twister, but it made me think under Donald Trump, we had real wage growth, and under Kamala Harris, we had real rage growth.
Oh,
people are raging about how expensive life has become. Insurance up over 50%. Rents are up almost 60%. Mortgages almost 100%. Groceries on average over 25%. It's just become unbearable. All right, I want to switch gears. I don't want to just talk about there's another big story that just came out that I think you will want to weigh in on. Just this morning, Representative Chairman Loudermilk of the Oversight Committee obtained never before seen correspondence between J6 committee member Representative Liz Cheney and Cassidy Hutchinson. He said in the months leading up to Hutchinson's explosive testimony to the J6 committee, Liz Cheney was secretly communicating with Hutchinson's directly and indirectly through Trump's former communication, Alyssa Farah Griffin, despite Cheney knowing as a lawyer how unethical this is. This is witness tampering. This is planting seeds of how to testify. Of course, Alyssa Griffin went on to take a contract with The View. Anyway, what are your thoughts on this story coming out that Liz Cheney secretly communicating with a J6 witness?
I'm glad you asked me about that. I did see those text messages, and it wasn't surprising to me, right? I don't think it's surprising for most people, other than maybe MSNBC viewers who won't see this anyway because they're not going to actually cover it, or CNN, who also gave a contract to Alyssa Farah, and now Alyssa Farah Griffin. I knew her as Alyssa Farah. This is what we knew was going on behind the scenes, honestly. It was very obvious at the level of coordination. And if you saw Cassidy Hutchinson's testimony before the J6 committee, it was obviously very scripted. And then it was discredited not very long afterwards. And honestly, I was a little bit shocked at how quick the Secret Service was to discredit her testimony, because there's a lot of questions I have about Secret Service on that day. And their text messages have still not been made available, or they say they're deleted from that day or whatever. But you knew that Liz Cheney had been coordinating with Cassidy Hutchinson. Here's what happened. And you might know this, maybe you talked about this, I don't know, but Cassidy Hutchinson was a former Trump staffer. She tried to get a job post transition in Mar-a-Lago. She wasn't one of those from a wealthy household who had anyone to get her a lawyer. She asked for help to have a lawyer help her with the J6 committee questions and their interviews, and no one was there for her. So she was an easy target for Liz Cheney to channel Alyssa Farah to enlist in their effort. What she did was absolutely wrong. It's pretty safe to say now she lied before the J6 committee, and she obviously did so because she had a little bit of coaching from behind the scenes and encouragement, right, from committee woman Liz Cheney. Alyssa Farah is also an interesting case in this. I've met a lot of opportunists in DC, Stephen. Alyssa Farah might be the least actually talented but greatest opportunist I've ever actually met in the swamp. And that is saying a lot. I met her when she was the spokeswoman. She was newly minted spokeswoman for Mike Pence. I had no idea at the time how problematic his office was, but she fit right in there. And she approached Cassidy Hutchinson because they had both come from Mark Meadows' world, right? And Cassidy was an easy target. Alyssa knew that. Alyssa took advantage of Cassidy being an easy target because she didn't have money to deal in this congressional power world. And I've seen these congressional hearings, these congressional probes bankrupt many good people. Americans don't know their names. You, Stephen, probably don't even know their names, but they're caught up in this political targeting of people like Donald Trump, and they're the ones who bear the brunt. Because of their legal fees, they lose their houses. They can't get jobs. Their families have to sell out their goods. They have to move. I particularly can think of many people from Russiagate that you wouldn't know their names. And Cassidy Hutchinson was one of those people who didn't have the means to stand up for herself, and she was an easy target. And Alyssa Farah knew that, and she helped enlist her for Liz Cheney's cause. Now, Alyssa Farah, there's a special place for her. And I don't think I probably ever really said this because she knows better. She comes from a better background. Her dad was the man behind WND, right? A very conservative site. And she knows exactly what she's doing. And now she's profiting at the expense of the American people. She has this contract on The View. But she probably has least integrity of most anybody I've met in Washington, D.C.
Yeah. The full phrase, there's a special place for that person in hell. Well, I think working on The View would be hell. I couldn't stand to be around those women for 5 minutes. Oh my gosh, it would make me crazy.
You know what? I think Alyssa is just probably fine. Meghan McCain probably had a harder time working with them than Alyssa Farah. I think Alyssa Farah, she doesn't. Meghan McCain might actually have more of a moral compass than Alyssa Farah. In all honesty, she's definitely whatever benefits her. Yeah. I think she'll be just fine with Whoopi and Joy. But you know what? It is interesting. This just shows how much they wanted to go with someone who hated Donald Trump as opposed to any really talented conservative, even someone who might not. I mean, you had options. The View had options where they could have went with a lady who was not perhaps, was critical of Donald Trump. They didn't have to be a Trumper. You had options out there, but a little more intelligent and well-spoken than Alyssa Farah. Again, she is one of the least talented people and least intelligent people that I have ever met in Washington, D.C. But she has risen to heights I would have never imagined when I met her. And we have had mutual friends for over a decade. So this is quite something else to see her on The View. But they definitely wanted someone that hated Donald Trump so much. They were going to forego someone who's good on TV because she's really not great on TV. And they were going to forego someone who was really an intellectual, right? which I wouldn't say the ladies on the View were intellectual, but the other conservative women have been much better and articulate than Alyssa Farah, but they wanted somebody who has such, exhibited such Trump derangement syndrome. And you know what? I actually don't think Alyssa has true TDS. Like, I don't think she really thinks these things about Donald Trump, as opposed to some people like Meghan McCain, who I think really has TDS and who thinks this about Donald Trump. Alyssa's just an opportunist. This is what she saw. She knew that this would financially benefit her and benefit her career. And there she goes.
Yeah. All right. Final question. I appreciate you coming on. Donald Trump was right once again. During the ABC debate, David Muir decided to fact check Donald Trump when he said that crime statistics have actually gone up. He said, no, you're wrong, Mr. Former President. They've actually gone down under Kamala Harris. The FBI has revised their crime statistics and released them in the last day, showing crime actually went up by 4.5%. when they were originally claiming it had gone down by 2.1%. Why would the FBI be lying about crime statistics? Is this like the jobs number where they just revised them because at some point they had to tell the truth, but in the meantime, along the way, they could help Joe Biden look good, like he was creating all these jobs, help Kamala Harris look like there was less crime?
Why did Peter Strzok, a former FBI employee, have an insurance plan should Donald Trump be elected in 2016? The FBI is absolutely a partisan political operation, and they exhibit that every chance they get. And this is just another example of their partisanship and their politicization. Okay.
Well, I mean, it seemed to work along the way, right? Wall Street saw a nice bump when they lied about the jobs. David Muir got to fact check. They got that sound bite. But now the truth is coming out, right before the election that Trump was right.
It's like the Hunter Biden laptop, right? Where the FBI withheld that information. Bill Barr, Trump's attorney general, withheld the information to benefit Joe Biden. And then all the news organizations played along. We all knew it had been independently verified by multiple entities well prior, we knew that within days of it coming out prior to the November 2020 election, but everybody pretended that until they didn't have to pretend anymore. And then because they want to keep some level of credibility, right? Though they've lost all credibility, they just have to keep some level of it when it doesn't matter anymore. And they say, oh yeah, well, that was right all along. And see, we're on the right side of this.
Yeah. Oh gosh.
So they live to lie another day.
Live to lie another day. That sounds like a great James Bond video title. Emerald, thank you so much for coming on. I know how busy you are with multiple interviews, running your own show. If people want to follow you online, where can I send them?
I always say the best place to follow me is on my Substack at emerald.tv. That's where I include most of my commentary and investigative reporting. We've also started a new subsection that is called Project Sentinel. And people often ask me, well, what can we do? How do we understand the national security apparatus of our country? And this is written largely, they give me notes, and then we put it on the Substack. We rewrite it in a narrative form that people can read more easily. But these are from deep sources within the national security community. And they have very strong suggestions for how we save our constitutional republic. So that is at my emerald.tv Substack as well. You can always find me on X at Emerald Robinson, or I say always, you can find me for now on X at Emerald Robinson. Hopefully that remains true in the future as well. And you can watch my show every day at 8 p.m. Eastern on frankspeech.com, or download the app from the App Store of Frank Speech.
Okay. I will put those down below. Thank you for coming on. I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. You as well, Stephen. Thank you as always.